that means that society by nature has to be generic. So culture is very useful. It allows you to fit in and get on. And like I said, I'm in India and I can talk to Indians because this global culture. Culture is a glue. Culture helps us communicate, but it can never help us liberate. It can never help us actualize. It can never help us individualize and become who you really are. So on one level, you have a need to fit in with the group, and that gives you a sense of security and support as a human being, and helps you grow and develop and find fulfillment as a human being on a level. But on a certain level, it must ultimately fail, because you're going to be waiting an awful long time for the entire majority of the human population to be in a state of self-actualization. Because if you're waiting for the group to become self-actualized, you're going to be waiting many thousands of years, because that means everybody has to get there. And that everybody getting there will be an awfully long time away from here for every dumbass to become a clever dick, okay? It's not going to happen in a big rush. Hi. Today I want to talk about culture and self-identity. Now you might be wondering, what has culture to do with self-identity? Well, actually it's very key if you want to grow and develop as a human being to understand the role of culture and how it affects who you are today, in what ways it pushes you forward and what way it hinders you, because ultimately you have to transcend culture to a great degree. So what exactly we think of culture, we think of like we got Asian culture, we got Western culture, but that's a very generic way. Let's think of it this way. I was born and raised in Ireland, so I was raised in the Irish milieu. I'm presently living in India, so I'm surrounded by Indian culture. So culture basically works like plug and play, that you don't have to work to get into a culture. You're born into certain culture, certain background, and you buy into that culture. And so it means you don't have to learn everything. There's many things which are already pre-packed. And I think an easy concept we have is this idea of plug and play products, or the likes of add-ons, or you can just buy some for a small amount of money. You can buy some kind of upgrade to your software. It's like that. You're buying into a certain software, like you get a laptop or desktop. It already has certain software packages already on the system for you. Well, culture is like that. You don't have to understand everything. You don't have to work everything out for yourself. It's just a bunch of values and attitudes which are already there. So the good thing about culture is that you don't have to work at it. The bad thing about culture is you don't have to work at it. So culture is good in the sense that it gives you a foot in the door, a way of acting in the world. And there's different types of cultures. So obviously we have whatever culture you're raised into. We also have a global culture. I presently live in India, for example, and I don't share all the cultural, let's say the reference points with everybody here. They don't fully understand me, I don't fully understand them, but a lot of it we understand, because culture is like Venn diagrams, different kind of cultures, work culture, family culture, Western culture, Eastern culture, and so on and so forth. And there's many aspects, which I like to call global culture, which is that we buy into many things. So, for example, years ago I read some books by a guy called Paul Brunton. One was called The Search in Secret India, one was called The Search in Secret Egypt. It's very fascinating because I'm presently living in Hyderabad. I used to live in Chennai. And Paul Brunton came to stay in Chennai back in probably about 100 years ago or so. And he wrote these books. And it's very interesting. He talked about these people he met in Chennai and Tamil Nadu, that state that Chennai is in. And he had pictures of people he met. And I found that as a guy who also came to India, I came to India as a mature man, and I also came to the same place, more or less. And I always was wondering, in what way is the Chennai that I came across similar to the one that he came across, or different? And I came to the conclusion that he was probably dealing with a radically different place. Now, of course, the British Empire was there, so there's a certain amount of cultural reference point in the sense of the empire. But, life was very different those days. So somebody living 100 years ago on the eastern seaboard of America will probably have quite a different life to somebody living in the western seaboard. Somebody in Chennai might be living quite differently from somebody in New Delhi, for example. They're quite different. Somebody in remote part of Ireland might be living quite differently than somebody from Dublin City. Nowadays the world is smaller with all those flights that we have, and the fact that we watch the same type of movies, TV shows, same apps. We have a lot of social media interaction with people from all over the world. So we actually have a kind of a global culture. And of course, there's different sub-pockets in that little echo chamber. So, for example, we have the cultural wars in Europe and America, the Anglosphere, where we see people, on the left, people on the right, having literally different realities that they're living in, even though they're supposed to be into one culture. But we do tend to have a kind of a global culture today that, well, no matter what country you came from, you've probably seen certain movies, you've probably read certain books, you probably use certain apps, you're probably up to speed with certain things. And it does help a lot. And I'm pretty sure Paul Brunton 100 years ago probably had a lot more difficulty than I have. Like, I can watch a lot of Western TV movies and TV shows, and even the food, I can get a lot of Western food and so on. So that's the effect of global culture. But from the point of view of self-improvement and making the most of your life, I think what we have to understand is really culture, mainly in the sense of human culture. Anthropology is the study of human beings. Anthro means human, so anthro-culture, the culture of what it is to be a human being. So I just posted a video a few days ago with some clips from Jordan Peterson and a lecture he had in 2014 where he talks about some aspects of culture. He talks about how people jump up and down and get excited over things like football games. He talked about how in war people will sacrifice, even though normally people sacrifice the culture and go for themselves. Like, people, even in their family, for example, most people are fairly selfish. But in a war situation, people will sacrifice for the country. It's very strange how people suddenly change their tune. And he mentions in one of those clips how you don't even know the degree to which culture is there. Culture is affecting you, molding you, affecting you. You're part of it, it is part of you. And the reason why you like things like football games, and people get excited by things like football games and cricket games and baseball games and all these things, is because it's a way of releasing tensions as a group. And this gets to a bigger picture with culture. The basic thing is, if you go back to Freud and Freudianism, he basically comes up at the point that we have sacrificed our individual autonomy for collectivism. And what that means is that somewhere along the way, we were doing our own thing, and it made more sense to work together. Because if I'm in a collective, if I'm in a civilization, a society, I don't have to educate my kids, there's an education system. I don't have to do my own healthcare, there's a healthcare system. I don't have to worry too much about protecting my family, there's a police force. I don't have to worry too much protecting the borders, there's an army. There's something for everything. So in a collective civilization, I'm more likely to survive than on my own. It's very difficult to survive on my own. And so in civilization, we have this advantage. The disadvantage of civilization, of course, is that we have to sacrifice some individuality. And particularly when we look at our lower animalistic side, aggression and sexuality have to be repressed. And things like big social events, like sporting events, allow us to release some of those tensions, some of those excitements when people are watching, say, a boxing match or an MMA match, and watching one guy beat the crap out of another guy. The excitement they have is a release of tension. Many things that we do as groups are a release of sexual energy. So in one of Freud's books called Civilization and Its Discontents, he talks about the price we pay for civilization is guilt, because we have to fit in. And to fit in, we develop a thing called a superego, which is kind of like an inner policeman or policewoman or whatever it is. That is a critic that holds us back in some ways. So to fit in with society, we have to stop being really who we are. Now here's the paradoxical problem in self-identity, is that in order for us to fit in with society, we have to restrict ourselves. And in particular cultures will have little shadings that will affect it more. So each, like Japanese culture will be quite different from American culture, for example. Indian culture will be different from Irish culture, and so on. So each culture will have a shade, and if you're a particular part of a country, maybe that state or that particular part of the country will have a shade. It's like a lens through which you view the world. And one of the problems we have is that we're not even aware of that lens. So there are nuances to culture, but specifically, let's just say in a broad sense, so this everything I'm saying here will be filtered by the local area you come from the family you came from. You know, if you have a mother and father from different cultures, those different reference points will affect you in different ways. But also this anthropological culture, this human culture in general, is that you have sacrificed and I have sacrificed and we have all sacrificed to fit into civilization by not being who you really are. Now, we are here on this channel and talking about self-actualization, about liberation, about becoming the person you're meant to be, not just fitting in. And this is the failing of culture. The failing of culture is that culture is generic. Culture allows you to join civilization pretty much zero cost. You don't have to work for it, but also it won't work for you. It's something you can get into, but something you can't get out of. It's there, you're part of it, it's part of you. And you don't even realize your frameworks. That's why when we get war situations, people get excited, and suddenly the tribe, the group has gone to war, and you'll feel like sacrificing for the country. Why? Because culture is there. It's inside you. You're part of it. You can't divide yourself from the vibes of the country, from the vibes of your fellow men and women who are living in that country and creating that egregore, meaning that group spirit that is there. So culture is all around you. So from the point of view of self-actualization, there's two major points that we have to realize. The first major point that we have to realize is that we have these filters and we must try and become aware of them. Let's take cognitive dissonance, for example. Cognitive dissonance is whereby we vaguely know something is not real, we won't accept it. A great example always of cognitive dissonance is, say, a religious group. They say that the world's going to explode on the 5th of August. It doesn't. So what they do then is they say, well, it's 5th of August 30 years from now. And they go back to fitting in with their system of belief, because if belief means reality, meets reality, and belief fails, people will tend to change reality. It's a very strange thing that people do. That's on a big level. But on a smaller level, cognitive dissonance could be you're drinking too much alcohol and you know you shouldn't, but you are. You're eating too much food, you know you shouldn't, but you are. You're watching too much social media, not working properly, you know it, but you don't. So we have a lot of this, and everybody to some degree, in order to cope with reality, has a certain amount, a certain level of cognitive dissonance going on in their life. And that's how we can deal with life to some degree. But also is to see and realize to what degree is this hitting us. So if we want to grow and develop as a person, we have to try and become a little bit aware of those filters which are affecting us. If I go back to TV shows I used to watch back when I was a kid, back in the 1980s, some of them are cringeworthy because they're so misogynistic. And I think we've made a lot of progress in the whole misogyny thing the last 30 years because you just wouldn't make TV shows like that anymore. But we didn't see it. We didn't think we'd be misogynist. I used to watch TV shows where you'd have like blackface. And when I was a kid, one of my favorite ice creams called the Gollywog Bar, a little African person kind of Gollywog Bar. We didn't know that this was racist, but it was. So same token, if somebody could come from a time machine 100 years in the future and come today, they would look at some of the attitudes that we have and they would think them bizarre. And we just wouldn't be aware. So we're not aware of ourselves. We're not aware of our ignorance. Fortunately, with each passing decade and so on, as a human being, we tend to become aware of our ignorance. As a civilization, we become aware. So we are progressing in some ways. The point I'm making here is that if you really want to fulfill yourself, you have to attempt to, first of all, realize that you're filtering your reality, and then attempt to become more and more honest about what you're doing and become more aware of who you really are. It's not something you can completely do, but at least you can try and do it. The second thing is realize that you are sacrificing who you really are to fit into society. And this is probably the bigger picture, which is basically you could never have fulfillment individually within a society. A society can become better, but it can never give you the satisfaction you want. It can never give you the self-actualization you want, because society must run on the lowest common denominator. Another theory of Freud's, put forth in his book called The Psychopathology of Everyday Life, is that human beings will always drift to the lowest common denominator. In a group of people, the overall conscious level of the group will go down to the lowest common denominator. If you look at politicians, for example, the most successful politician is the one who can reach out to the largest group of people. Occasionally there has been an intellectual giant of a politician, but not many. And now and again they will somehow manage to get success, but usually the more intellectual person will not be a successful politician because it will only appeal to this intellectual subgroup. The politician who gets belly laughs usually wins votes. Why? Because they appeal to the majority of people. And if you want to appeal to the majority of people, you have to go for the LCM, the lowest common, or LCD should say, lowest common denominator. And that means that society by nature has to be generic. So culture is very useful. It allows you to fit in and get on. And like I said, I'm an Indian. I can talk to Indians because this global culture. Culture is a glue. Culture helps us communicate, but it can never help us liberate. It can never help us actualize. It can never help us individualize and become who we really are. So on one level, you have a need to fit in with the group, and that gives you a sense of security and support as a human being, and it helps you grow and develop and find fulfillment as a human being on a level. But on a certain level, it must ultimately fail, because you're going to be waiting an awful long time for the entire majority of the human population to be in a state of self-actualization. Because if you're waiting for the group to become self-actualized, you're going to be waiting many thousands of years, because that means everybody has to get there, and that everybody getting there will be an awfully long time away from here for every dumbass to become a clever dick. Okay, it's not going to happen in a big rush, if ever at all. So what we have to do to really understand our self-identity, become who we are, is we have to do it on an individual basis. So the theory that I have, the belief that I have, I can't prove it, but I believe it to probably be the case, is that each person is an individual. You're born as a special individual. You have certain traits and aptitudes and so on, and certain individual needs and desires, and you want to become who you really are. But early in your life, you look around you and you start copying other people. Jacques Lacan, the famous French psychoanalyst, calls it the mirror phase, whereby we look and we copy around us. But the mirror is always the inverse. It's not who I really am, but I'm trying to be what I think I should be, rather than who I really am. Now, of course, most psychoanalysts, I'm pretty sure, including Lacan, think there is no ideal that you could be. I think there is a real you, and I think there is an ideal you, but you've somehow learned to become not you, because in that effort to fit into society, you learn to fit in as a small child and become who you're not. And the sad thing is, and it's a very sad thing, is that your parents are already, and the elders around you are not being who they really are. So if you look at small kids tend to be cocky, they tend to be imaginative, and they're very free. And then somewhere along the way, they start losing it, especially by the teens. This stage will come at maybe 13, 14, 15, 16, where the adult mind will start to kick in, and they suddenly become more serious. And the moment this adult mind kicks in, usually around the 14, 15 mark, they will suddenly become your typical teenager, all anxious and upset, just like adults. And it's very strange that as soon as this adult mind comes in, we're all playful and joyful, and then the adult mind comes in, and we suddenly be all upset, because we've put a cultural filter on ourselves, whereby we're now judging ourselves by the norms of our society. And of course, we can't fit in, because it's not who we are, because we're trying to become generic, and we're actually individualistic. And so we can never fit into the norms of society. It's not possibly normal. Normal does not really exist. It's a fantasy, a cultural artifact that we're trying to become, that we're not really. I'm not criticizing it, I'm just saying what it is. And that already from early childhood, we're forgetting to be who we are. So you see a small kid, 3 or 4, they'll tell you they want to fly to the moon. The same kid at 10 years of age probably won't say that. They've already lost that, even at that stage. So who you really were, if you want to find out who I really was, who I really am, go back to who you were at 2, 3, 4 years of age. So even by 5 or 6, you're starting to lose it. But still, you have a joy, you have a lightness of youth and childhood, a kind of an innocence and a broadness in your perspective, because your mind is different. Your mind, as the culture of a kid's mind, is very broad and varied, and it has a lot of self-expression in it. But once the adult mind kicks in, it's locked. And it's locked into this position, which is a rather dreadful position, of being all stressed out about money and success and fitting in and being liked by other people and how could I get on with life, and all the frustrations that we have are in this adult mind. So it's a weird situation we found ourselves in society. So the best thing that you can do, or I can do, or anybody else can do, to actualize ourselves, to liberate ourselves, to individuate ourselves, is to try and go back to who we were actually born to be. So we were born rich, we were born free, but we've forgotten who we are, and we're now in a kind of a mind prison. So you can be protected and guided and helped in civilization generically, but you cannot become free generically. You cannot become actualized or individuated individually, or collectively, in a generic sense. It has an individual function. How to get there is, of course, a big long story, how we can get there, and something that each of us has to individually aspire to, and also a cultural value that society can promote. We can actually develop that culture when society, the culture of looking within and becoming who you really are. But ultimately, while you're in culture, and culture is embedded in you, and who you are strongly influenced by culture, your ultimate happiness is to transcend culture. Now, of course, you must fit in with culture. You have to pay your bills and fit in. Otherwise, you're going to be living in the jungle somewhere, and that's an awful rough existence. So going off grid is nearly impossible. But somehow we have to be on grid, but on some level we have to be an individual. It's a challenge. This is the tightrope walk that we all have to walk between fitting in and standing out. So ultimately, you can only really be happy and satisfied and fulfilled when you stand out, not when you fit in. But somehow you have to fit in with society, and that is a challenge. So that is the effect of culture and self-identity. Your self-identity is wrapped in culture, and culture is very useful. I'm not anti-culture. I tell you, culture is a useful thing. Living in civilization has got a lot of advantages to it. But you're only going to become who you really are meant to be. You're going to actualize yourself individually, and that's something to be aware of. So be aware of your filters, and be aware that you have to go and find your own way home, as it were. You have to find out who you really are. And that's a long process, and there's many different aspects of that. Some videos on this channel address that. I'll make more videos to address that. There's no single path or single direction. It's something we have to aspire to, like a kind of an individual work of art over a period of many years, work towards becoming who we really are. But just so, I suppose the message of this video is that culture is immersed in you. You're immersed in culture. You can't be free of culture, and also you'll never be free as long as you're only in culture. So your ultimate freedom is in transcending culture while fitting in with culture, which of course is its challenge. I hope you like this video. If you do, please like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you next time.